Ever since I started blogging at nomadcapitalist.com a decade ago, people from the United States would tell me, Andrew, you're crazy. Everyone wants to come to the United States. And yet today, I'm going to share with you an article that says why that's just not working. Hi, I'm Andrew Henderson. This is Nomad Capitalist. We're the channel and the company that helps 7- and 8-figure entrepreneurs and investors legally go where you're treated best. And the one thing I've been trying to talk about for years is not that countries like the United States are bad. I certainly have many disagreements with the United States where I'm from, but it's not that it's bad. What the United States has is this great legacy brand where people, especially Americans, think that everyone wants to come there. And they point to things like migrant caravans as evidence that that is true, even though you see wealthy Americans leaving in record numbers, even though you see, and I see personally traveling the world, large numbers of people in emerging and middle-income countries that don't want to go to the US, don't want to go to the UK. They want to stay in their own country increasingly. And it speaks to what I'm saying, that there are so many more opportunities out there where you can start a business, where you can become successful. We help people who come from Egypt, from Morocco, from Ukraine, from African countries in sub-Saharan Africa, from Colombia, from Southeast Asia, people who have built very successful businesses from scratch, not because they inherited it, but because they built it, because we live in an age when you can do that more than ever in human history. And so when I saw this article in Forbes entitled, "Why the U.S. is Losing Immigrant Entrepreneurs to Other Nations," I found it very interesting because it talks about the dynamics of how certain countries don't really understand the new competitive nature of the world, and they're still living in an era when there were so few choices. And this is an article written by Amy Feldman on the Forbes staff, and it says, America's convoluted and highly politicized immigration system puts roadblocks in the way of foreign-born founders. As 24 other countries woo them with startup visas and other perks, the U.S. is at risk of losing its edge in the global battle for talent. John S. Kim, co-founder of Sendbird, which offers real-time chat and messaging for mobile apps and websites, relocated from South Korea to San Francisco 5 years ago. He wanted to be close to his U.S. customers like Yahoo, Reddit, and Headspace. Does Yahoo still have customers? Are they still a customer of anybody at Yahoo? He also wanted to have access to Silicon Valley venture capital, which I don't know that you necessarily have to be there to do, but certainly it seems like a press the flesh kind of vibe to a large extent. Hire American engineers. Again, don't have to be there to do that. And certainly, perhaps better to move the Americans somewhere else from a tax perspective. And expand his company here in the United States. He easily obtained an L-1 non-immigrant visa for foreign executives, given that he first started the business in South Korea, but in 2019 he had only one extension left. He applied for a green card to get legal permanent residence and received a letter that he'd likely be denied. He said, "We'd raised $100 million plus in financing. We had real revenue in the tens of millions of dollars. We were creating jobs. The rejection was a slap in the face for sure." Kim, as it turned out, whose company is now worth $1 billion and counts SoftBank and Tiger Global among its investors, was lucky. 2 months later, after discussing contingency plans with his CFO and filing piles of additional documentation, including translations of his South Korean military service roles, he got his green card. But he still feels traumatized by the experience. "You want to build a company and you don't want to get kicked out," he said, who lives in San Francisco with his wife and 2 children. It's like the Grim Reaper that hangs over you when you're not a citizen. Long a hotbed of entrepreneurialism and a beacon of hope for immigrants, the United States is now known for a convoluted, highly politicized immigration policy that puts roadblocks in the way of foreign-born founders. And that's true. You look at our business. While we don't generally help people move to the United States, we have occasionally helped someone naturalize as a U.S. citizen from a green card. We also see in the industry as a whole people talking about things like the EB-5 program. You know, the Portugal Golden Visa might raise its price. A program might, tighten up its criteria. But no program is more politicized than the idea of bring your $500 or now $900,000 to invest in the U.S. It is really very hard to see certainty. And for everyone who says this is a country of the rule of law, certainly the United States does have the rule of law to a large extent, but it doesn't really offer certainty to a lot of these foreign-born investors and foreign-born founders who want to come and, by the way, put themselves in the tax net where they pay tax on all their income worldwide, including people like Kim, who anything they own in South Korea could now be taxed in the United States as well. The result is that for years, the article continues, immigrants who want to start businesses in the United States contort themselves into one of the visa categories, such as O2, which only applies to certain nationals, or O1, people who have extraordinary ability, or try to cobble together something out of a half dozen other categories, none of which is really designed for them. Former President Donald Trump's overt hostility towards immigrants isn't echoed by the present administration, but neither President Joe Biden nor the new Congress has taken the necessary measures to make the U.S. a more welcoming place for highly skilled newcomers. The basic problem is that America has no startup visa specifically for founders, despite more than a decade of efforts to get one established, and that really is the problem. What I've always said is smaller countries can be more nimble, they are able to get things done more quickly, and that's why you see countries like in the Baltics, countries like Portugal. I mean, for the love of Pete, France has a freelance and startup visa regime. The U.S. has been trying, but the U.S. does everything for a long time, and it just doesn't work out. Now, you've seen countries like Ireland, like the UK, that have tightened it up and say, listen, please don't come and open a restaurant. Don't come and open a hotel. We want you to come and create something really substantial. We're not just going to let everybody in. But at least there is a regime for guys like this Kim who have a $1 billion business and are at risk of being kicked out of the country. Roughly 25 countries, she says, including Singapore and the UK, Singapore has also tightened up in recent years, are wooing entrepreneurs with startup visas set up in the past decade. It's not like they came up with the idea. It's an American idea that we failed to act on, says Jeff Farah, General Counsel of the National Venture Capital Association. There's a battle for talent, says Steve Case, the billionaire co-founder of, if you thought Yahoo was out of business, AOL, and investment firm Revolution, who's been outspoken on the importance of a startup visa. We want the best people with the best ideas who want to come to the United States and stay in the United States and start and build their companies here. Otherwise, we risk losing our lead as the most innovative entrepreneurial nation in the world. Not only do immigrant founders create jobs at their own companies, he says, but there's a ripple effect that leads to additional jobs in the larger community. And so the article goes on, and it goes on, and it talks about all the impact that these people bring. It says the U.S. isn't making anything easy. And there's plenty of stories of geopolitics and how that gets in the way, and lots of billion-dollar companies, lots of big companies that have lots of job creation really not being allowed to come in or not being allowed to stay. Now, to me, this is not an issue that people who are following Nomad Capitalist face, because the countries that we talk about are wide open to almost everyone. You can go and start your company in the UAE. You can go and start your company in Georgia. You can go and start your company in a lot of places, and you can relatively easily get a residence permit. In some cases, they want to see you're doing a little bit of business, or they want to see a business plan. Some people don't even care about that. But the article is correct that the United States is really very, very difficult. Now, why does that matter? Well, it matters for a couple of reasons. Number one, I've said that culture matters. And politics is a reflection of the culture. If you had people who thought differently, they would elect politicians who acted differently. The United States is a very isolated country, by and large. People don't really realize that, Mexico is actually, on a global standard, a somewhat wealthy country with a great passport. They can travel to a lot of places. There's this sort of dismissiveness to that, for example. And so what happens, and we've been hearing about this for years, is people, they graduate from top U.S. schools, they get kicked out, they can't get a job, they can't start a business. People have these great businesses, they can't stay there. And E2, I knew a guy who had an E2 for 30 years. He said he would get harangued sometimes when he came into the country. I mean, the guy's like running a big business, employing a lot of people, and it just wasn't as certain. I have a residence permit or two where we have a business, and I can tell you I don't get bothered at all. Now, why is this important? Because as I've traveled around, I've spent a lot of time in very emerging countries. I've spent time in somewhat emerging countries, places like Malaysia, which are very livable and people are happy there. And a lot of people say, you know what, I don't have a great ambition to move to the U.S. I like my country. Maybe I'll go and study in the U.S., or in some countries the U.K. is much more preferable. But I want to come back and live here because it just seems a lot easier. I've talked to people who say they want to go to Europe because Europe seems more stable. Countries like Germany, countries like Ireland, people I talk to. Portugal has been one that's come up recently. And so, the culture of not wanting people to come and start businesses is important. While at the same time, the culture right now in the U.S. and other Western countries is that people aren't paying enough tax. And yet they're driving out people who are tired of being milk cows. And yet there are people who are perfectly welcome or willing to come and bring their billion-dollar companies to the U.S. shores. Nah, we don't want you. It's a sort of, damned if you do, damned if you don't, where I don't see how in a global competitive market this works well forever. Now, certainly the U.S. has more power to do this than, let's say, the U.K. or Australia or Singapore, because it's such a huge domestic market. But you're going to see a lot more billion-dollar companies in the coming years. I know that some of the folks in the West don't want to hear that because they don't like the idea that people are going to be getting wealthy running businesses, and that it's terrible for income inequality that a guy like this Mr. Kim can start a business from nothing with no special advantages. He starts the business and it becomes very, very valuable. He shouldn't be allowed to do that. And so perhaps that's kind of a confluence of events where in Dubai or Singapore or Israel or a lot of other places, they don't care. They just, hey, we're trying to get on the map. We're trying to build our country. Please bring your billion-dollar business. All right, fine. You have a lot more money than everybody else. We don't care about that. We're not so sophisticated to have that problem. But the world's competitive. That's what these legacy brand countries are missing. I have no problem with the UK saying, you know what? You have to get funding from an incubator. Ireland and Singapore and others have also said, okay, come on, please bring your serious businesses. We have enough like small businesses. We want companies that are going to be maybe not the next Facebook, but some fraction of that. I have no problem with saying that. But to keep a guy with $1 billion business out, to me, speaks to the competitiveness. At a time when wages are stagnant in the U.S., if you're in the 50th percentile now, your salary is $34,000. How are you going to turn that around? People from the U.S. are leaving. I have people who have taken companies public. I have people who run, big companies, lots of employees. They're not doing business in the U.S. anymore, precisely because it's so difficult. Forget the taxes, which are also at times punitive. Forget the tax rules and the filings and all that kind of stuff, the regulations. That's no fun. But the litigation. This, again, is just the world has changed. If your country's not changing with it, if your country's not keeping up with the times, if you still think the Cold War is going on and there's like 4 places to go, you're not going to be successful. And when you don't become successful and you don't create new innovation, your people, your wages, they're going to become stagnant. And you're seeing what's happening when that happens right now. People in some of these other countries I'm mentioning, they occasionally get all a little bit fired up. But I don't see the same kind of thing where no one should be rich. We should have a maximum wage. We should tax everyone into oblivion. I don't see that in some of these places that are welcoming, because there's a sense of inclusion. A rising tide is lifting all boats, and that's just not happening in some of the legacy brand countries. To me, that is concerning if you are invested in or living in one of those places in the long run. Don't stop now. We've got well over 1,000 more videos here on YouTube for you to watch and learn how to go where you're treated best. And if you want to work with Nomad Capitalist personally, go to nomadcapitalist.com/apply, learn about our unique, tried and true process, garnered over years of experience, and learn how you can become our client.